When George W. Bush was running for president, he appealed to people by promising to restore traditional values in the wake of the Clinton scandal. He also wanted to downsize the federal government, rebuild the military, and transfer many government programs to the states. He presented himself as a family man, and he appealed to Christian fundamentalists by supporting school prayer and promising government assistance to faith based organizations that help people who are addicts, welfare mothers, and ex prisoners. The TAMP program, which is Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, was scheduled to be reauthorized in 2002. Because of the bipartisan bickering, few changes were actually made to the program. Everything changed as a result of the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001. Two hijacked planes crashed into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. Another plane crashed into the Pentagon, and a fourth crashed into a field in Pennsylvania after passengers thwarted hijackers who wanted to hit either the White House or the Capitol building. Bush immediately declared war, and this became the focus of his presidency. He issued an ultimatum to the Taliban to turn over bin Laden or face invasion. When the Taliban refused to turn over bin Laden, Bush ordered a massive bombing campaign in Afghanistan. Somehow, bin Laden got away, though. Bush pledged that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, and he pledged to remove them. Even when the UN inspectors could not find any weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, Bush insisted that Hussein must possess the weapons because he was refusing to make a full account of his weapons. In March 2003, the U.S. invaded Iraq despite the fact that there was considerable evidence that there were no VMDs, but also that such a move would destabilize the region and help Al Qaeda recruit men for its cause. Iraq's infrastructure was destroyed in the bombing, and the social unrest and ethnic hostilities followed in the wake of the invasion. As a result, Iraq needed huge expenditures on infrastructure and social programs. Nations were willing to help pay to rebuild Iraq, but only if the UN were in charge. Bush refused and said that the U.S. would take the lead. However, the U.S. officials had greatly underestimated the unrest that would occur in Iraq, as well as the amount of troops they needed to keep order. The U.S. historically has not been generous to developing nations. The U.S. only gives 10% of its GDP to developing nations, whereas Britain gives about 32%. 2.8 billion people survive on less than $2 a day. Diseases like malaria, typhoid fever, and AIDS devastate developing countries because they cannot afford the medications needed to treat diseases. Even though President Bush proposed a tax cut in 2003, huge amounts were being spent on the military, and the deficit increased rapidly. Bush managed to win the 2004 election by promising that he is the best man to combat terrorism. Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans and western Mississippi on August 29, 2005. There was a mandatory evacuation for all of New Orleans residents. Everyone left except for the 15,000 residents who were poor and had no way to leave. Hurricane Katrina caused more devastation than any other hurricane in American history. The failure of the government officials to respond humanely to the poor people of color who were left stranded was televised for the nation. People were on freeways and rooftops begging for food while George Bush hung out at his ranch. After his administration received backlash for this, Bush promised to deliver one of the largest reconstruction efforts the nation has ever seen. Unfortunately, they did not plan the reconstruction well, so the resulting reconstruction was hazardous and slow. Citizens of the worst flooding site in New Orleans were in the state of limbo while officials were saying it would be reconstructed, but they also feared it would remain unsafe for future hurricanes. The federal government failed to build adequate amounts of affordable housing. They also failed to subsidize the ruined public system of health care. Instead of hiring the low-income residents to help reconstruct the city, they relied on as many as 100,000 immigrants for labor. These immigrants were exploited. They worked in toxic environments and received very low pay. By the time the 2008 elections were coming up, Democrats were looking better, and for the first time, there was a chance of a woman, Hillary Clinton, and an African-American man, Barack Obama, becoming president. In Bush's 2 terms of office, he had increased federal spending for education, included tax concessions for low-income Americans and legislation, increased funding of programs to prevent HIV and AIDS, and helped its victims in developing countries, and added coverage of prescription drugs to the Medicare program. However, his domestic accomplishments were minimal. He will be most remembered for his controversial foreign policy decisions.